I always forget that Absolute Punk changed their name to Chorus FM.
Really?
You didn't know that Chorus FM used to be Absolute Punk?
No.
They ruined their brand. They pulled an X.com. Absolute Punk is a brand that I still think of when I'm like, Punk News, Absolute Punk. Those were the ones you went to find music or like news. And I'm always like, whatever happened to Absolute Punk? Guess it just doesn't exist anymore. Never investigating further to see that they changed their name to Chorus FM. I'm sure they got bought by somebody who was just like, we're going to use your user base. Because it was like a kind of a message board, right? That's how that site worked. And yeah, and they rebranded it to just something vague as shit. Chorus FM.
My favorite thing growing up, man, it was a little weirdo. My favorite thing were tournaments and brackets. Yeah, no response is the appropriate response.
What's up, patrons? Welcome to this week's bonus audio. I'm Justin.
I'm Dylan.
And we are back this week to play another round of Bracketology. This is where we take albums. We've pretty much only done albums on the Patreon version of the show. We used to do more like bands. And then I think I just had the idea. I was like, oh, we could just do albums and then we could do this thing forever. And so we've done like year-specific albums before. I think that's what all of those were then the Patreon. Because we did like the pop punk bracket, the ska bracket, all that stuff in the main feed. The Rolling Score bracket. And so for this episode, it is actually falling between the two challenge episodes we're posting. So we just posted the Start Today Gorilla Biscuits. I challenged you to pick an album from 1989, a debut album from 1989. And then next week's episode is going to be a debut album from the year 2022. And I was like, well, we could do 2022 albums head to head or 89 albums head to head. But I didn't think either one of those were going to create an interesting enough bracket really to fill out. So I was like, well, we could use debut albums. And I tried to figure out the best way to do this. And because I wanted to keep like the seeding option so that we could have like, you know, the number 1 seed versus the number 2 seed. And so what I did was I went to Rate Your Music. I went to the chart section and I just put in punk all time and then just went down the list until I found a debut album by an artist. So everything on this list, it's in order that it appeared on Rate Your Music. Good thing is this means that in the future we can do more debut albums too. So if we wind up like doing a year we've done before or something and we don't have enough options, we could do a debut one again. But because I went through the Rate Your Music chart and like picked like the first 2 pages of results, it wound up with a very, very r/moo. What was the 4chan music board? Like it's very much just like, yep, this is Music Guy's debut albums. These all would have been featured prominently on listicles on spin.com or so it's very like obvious stuff, but it's enough like interesting head to heads that it might be a little bit more like, oh, okay, that's actually kind of tough. And then some where you're like, oh, I don't care about that record at all. But yeah, let's get into it. Dylan hasn't seen the actual bracket. I sent him the list of albums, but just so you could have your approval and make sure there wasn't anything on there you're like, I don't know that record.
I've never heard that in my life. No, I think everything was something I've heard at least once.
And then I sometimes will like refresh the first couple tracks on a record just to be like, okay, yeah, that's what this one sounds like. There's really only like 1 or 2 like that for me, but all right, let's do it then. So our first head to head, it is the number 1 seed, the Velvet Underground and Nico, going up in their self-titled record, of course, going up against the Stooges and their self-titled record. They are the number 16 seed. So the Velvet Underground and Nico, I love that it's like, this is their debut album. It's like, well, it's also the only Velvet Underground and Nico album, which is very weird that their first record is like a collaborative record.
Yes. And the story is that it was like, she was kind of like forced in there. I don't know. I've read.
Is it?
I think it's a pretty tenuous collaboration. Because, I mean, was she dating John Cale at the time? Because didn't they get married at one point?
I don't know.
Or was it, I think maybe she got pushed in there because of Warhol.
At the instigation of their mentor and manager Andy Warhol and his collaborator Paul Morrissey, German singer Nico was featured. She had occasionally performed lead vocals for the band, so she wasn't even like a regular part of their live show. Yeah, it's an Andy Warhol decision then.
Yeah. That's what I was thinking. It was like, yeah, you should put my racist German friend on your record. And I'm gonna put a banana on the cover.
And it's gonna be the most famous thing you ever do, band.
Despite not being the best.
Yeah, it's not
at all. Is it like the worst?
I don't know. I haven't
the other records.
Let's see. What else is there?
I don't know. Squeeze. I guess Squeeze is probably the worst. I don't think I like Squeeze.
White Light, Heat. That's actually really good. That's actually probably more punk than this record is. I don't know the self-titled like at all. That was their third record. I do like Loaded. I like Loaded a lot actually. That's a really good record. And so I imagine Squeeze is probably good too. Yeah, it's very possible that the Velvet Underground and Nico might be their. It's weird because like it definitely has like it's iconic. It's a legendary album. It's a classic. And then nobody talks about their other records the way they talk about this one. But me personally, as a listener, I get way more out of their other material. This is just a little too heroin-y.
Yeah.
And because it's got heroin as a song. Yeah. It's good. I'm not going to say it's a bad record because it is a good record.
It is not the only wildly overrated landmark important record from 1967. 1967, it happens to be one of my years. So I've listened to some of the stuff on here. The top 3 all time, all genres, 1967 records are wildly overrated. It's Velvet Underground and Nico, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, and The Doors' self-titled debut. 3 records I really never want to listen to.
I mean, Sunday Morning is good. I'm Waiting for the Man is good. I mean, there's other, There She Goes Again. I mean, Heroin's not even a bad song. It's just way too long. Same with Venus and Furs. Run, Run, Run's pretty good. I mean, I can listen to this entire record and not turn it off, but I don't reach for it really ever. It's just a little too sparse sounding for me.
Well, and it just doesn't. It feels like it's Andy Warhol and Nico's record.
Yeah.
More than it feels like it's actually a Velvet Underground record, which is why I prefer a record like White Light, White Heat, because it's like this is genuinely their experimentation. Because
they had fired him by that point.
Cale and Maureen being freaks, it.
Yeah, I mean, Velvet Underground I think might be one of the most overrated bands in history. Probably just for this record mainly. This is their most overrated album.
I think their whole deal is pretty overrated, and I think that Lou Reed's pretty overrated.
Yeah. We've never really discussed them. What do we think of them being called the first punk band? This is the first punk record.
I get how it was influential, and it's experimental, and it definitely is on that that early experimental side of punk. I think that there are creative. They do things that were influences to punk bands. They're noisy, they're abrasive, they're pitchy, they do all of these things that are just we're gonna make really interesting, engaging music that is not technically proficient, and is trying new things that I think is very important to punk as a genre early on. So it's one of those ones where it's most of it doesn't really sound like what punk is, but in spirit, they are one of those bands that really defined that sloppiness and noisiness and experimentation that it doesn't bother me that they're up there. I wouldn't call them a punk band, but if they get the proto-punk tag, they absolutely should, because they were that influential. But
yeah, I mean, I guess proto-punk too really lets it. Proto's doing a lot of the lifting there, I think.
Yeah, But I think it's not that hard to make the transition, to make the connection from like the more straightforward songs in the Velvet Underground to like Jonathan Richman and the Modern Lovers.
Yeah, I guess if you really think about like the early CBGB scene too, like it's a lot of those bands you could tell are very clearly influenced by the Velvet Underground.
Yeah, and then like Television and Patti Smith, like they're like incredibly influenced by the Velvet Underground, and they're right there at the beginning of punk as a genre forming. Again, still Patti Smith more in the proto-punk way, and Television kind of more in the Television's like one of the first truly punk adjacent bands.
Yeah.
They were like there at the same time that the Ramones are defining a genre, but they're very much doing very different things. They're like tenuously connected musically, but
so they're going up against another proto-punk band, the Stooges, in their first album, which to me, the Stooges more embody that sound of what punk would actually really become. So I guess Velvet Underground is an influence on specifically the CBGB sound that is called punk, which invented like punk as the term, and part of the fashion was started there too. Whereas the Stooges are like, and this is how it should sound. So like, which really what the Stooges were doing, they were just doing garage rock inspired by, the Sonics, that kind of stuff. And the Doors even too. Like there's definitely a doorsiness to the Stooges early stuff. But because they were just like so hard hitting and so like wild live, that's where you're like, oh, the Dead Boys are more indebted to the Stooges than the Velvet Underground. And so this is the first record. It's got 1969, I Want to Be Your Dog, No Fun. And it's one of the 3 Stooges records that existed at this time, during this era, before their reunion stuff later.
Yeah.
And we covered the third record, Raw Power, earlier this year for the 30th anniversary or 50th anniversary, 30th anniversary. I don't know. And then on that one, we talked about how that's probably the weakest Stooges record, whereas we were like, Funhouse is probably their best. So that then I guess puts this right in the middle, which I'd still agree with. I still think this is probably the second best Stooges record.
Yeah. This is definitely the second best, and it's pretty close to Funhouse.
Yeah,
I think those first 2 Stooges records are incredible records. Produced by John Cale of the Velvet Underground. So that connection does carry through. I think when you talk about like, especially if you get into like how quickly like the UK punk sound like becomes central to the sound of punk, the Stooges are that band that influenced both sides. I think everybody wanted to be the Stooges from the beginning.
Yeah, there's a level of like artiness that the Velvet Underground have that not everyone wants to be.
Yeah, and the Stooges were really arty and weird.
Yeah,
but they also were riffs. They were also like, they were like smart and dumb. Like they truly understood how to just play rock music. And I think Iggy is like the one doing most of like the weird brainy stuff. But even then, like he understands like the I don't think that it was just like, I'm going to do a bit. I think he really was just like, I really do want to roll around on the floor and take my clothes off. Like
Yeah, as fun and like essential as Iggy Pop was to the sound, Ron Ashton's guitar really is probably more important to like punk's music going forward. Like the way he played. I mean, he's just doing like poorly played psych guitar and probably equal level garage rock guitar, and kind of just mixing them in a way that sounded really fucking cool. They just sounded cool as hell.
Should we vote?
We should. So, what are you voting for? The Velvet Underground and Nico, or the Stooges?
It's the Stooges.
Yeah, same. Stooges for me as well. I mean, that's pretty obvious if you know us and the way we just talked about these records. Talk about how overrated the Velvet Underground are. So, all right, let's move on to our second head-to-head. It is the number 8 seed Wire and their album Pink Flag up against the number 9 seed, the Mars Volta, and their debut, Deloused in the Comatorium.
What a
weird head-to-head. So, okay, Wire. Let's start there. Pink Flag, the first post-punk record released the same year that punk records were coming out. The UK, man, they burned through punk rock so fast. I can't believe it's just like, I guess it was the limitations of the style at the time, because they were just like, well, all we are is Mercy Beat and pub rock mixed with the Ramones. So how do we make this work? And then they're like, well, we could try something else. And then like, it's a whole new subgenre. It's like you just played the bass a little bit more forward.
Yeah, we're listening to Brian Eno records.
Yeah, Pink Flag, the first Wire record. It's probably the most like punk Wire album as well, because they basically invent post-punk, and then they're just like, we invented it, and they like perfected it too. Like they pretty much were like, and this is what post-punk is, pretty quickly. So Pink Flag has the more raw edge to it, and it's a good record. It's let's see, how many songs is it?
21 songs.
Yeah, it's long. It's funny. It's like a lot of tracks, but like only one song is over. 3 songs over 3 minutes. Most of the tracks are like between 30 seconds and a minute and a half, though. Like, so probably the average length of song on the record combined is probably like under 2 minutes, which is cool, which most punk bands weren't even doing then. I thought it was very interesting that they were just like, yeah, we're going to write a bunch of really short songs. And I know you've said before that like Pink Flag is not your favorite Wire record. It is mine. It feels more punk than the other 2 original Wire albums.
I like the weirdness of Chairs Missing. I think that record, I actually was listening to that record yesterday. It still holds on to a lot of the Pink Flag stuff. But I mean, Chairs Missing is like the preference for me because it does a little bit more, but also does what they do on the first record. But the first record is so good. Like it is an incredible record. Like, beginning to end, it's very, very enjoyable. It's smart. It's interesting. It's catchy. I think it's a great record. I think it's like an important record for a reason. It's not to discredit it. They're very close together, I think, in terms of quality.
Yeah, I definitely lean towards the 2 songs that Washington D.C. bands loved, X-Lion Tamer and 12XU, the most. Like, these are the songs that felt the most. They're not hardcore songs, but you can see where hardcore bands were like, I like these. These are fast. We could play these. And they had like an edge to it that you could turn into a hardcore song, whereas like the Ramones played fast too, but nobody ever was turning Ramones songs into hardcore songs like they could with this. So, and it is going up against the Mars Volta's first record, the post At the Drive-In band with Cedric and what's the other guy?
Omar.
And they were like, instead of being a screamo post-hardcore band inspired by Discord Records, let's be this weird proggy glammy thing. What is the Mars Volta?
Prog rock?
Yeah,
it's prog rock. I mean, it's prog rock if you arrived at prog rock as a genre, like if you came to the same creative conclusions without going through the same process that developed the genre of prog rock. Like you're not coming from, I mean, you're coming from psych, but I think you're taking a different path. You're not coming from psych into like the blues rock and like jazz rock UK, music scene. You're maybe going from psych to hardcore. It's like a non-existent path. Like you can't like actually map it out. Like you have to have At the Drive-In as a band for the Mars Volta to exist. But I think like it's prog rock for people that like the only prog rock band they ever actually listen to is Pink Floyd, probably. Maybe that's not true, because I'm sure there's plenty of King Crimson fans who love the Mars Volta. But
yeah, the Mars Volta are probably like, they're a weird band for the type of person who like also votes on Velvet Underground records as like the best albums. Because it is they come to prog rock through punk subgenres, being like post-hardcore, screamo, and scene adjacent bands, and then they're like, let's do psychedelic progressive rock, but also like play it with like the speed of punk and hardcore.
Yeah. I mean, I guess there's like, I'm trying to think of like, I don't know. It's like it's a very esoteric collection of like heavy psych and like probably like really obscure prog bands, and like definitely like a big Latin rock influence too. Like, I mean, not just because they are like Mexican, but because like they just genuinely were listening to that music and being like, this is this is what we grew up listening to, and it's really influential. And like, I don't know, it's a weird band. It's a weird band.
I like some of their records. I do like Delos of the Comatorium. I do like, what else? I like the first couple records by them. Let's see. I like Francis the Mute and Bedlam and Goliath. But I like Bedlam and Goliath, I think, is like the last one of theirs that I listened to. And then they got like real weird, where they were just like, now we have records under just our names. But it's like, but aren't you just the Mars Volta too? Like you're the Mars Volta, but you're still like, we're going to release Omar and Cedric records. It's like, cool. And they're going to be just like Latin fusion albums. It's like, that's cool. And then they brought back the Mars Volta, and then it was just like a pop record, like pop music, more in common with like D'Angelo than what they were doing before. Very weird career. But I do like at least the first half of their discography. They're interesting. It's so funny because like really, if you look at, it's like them and Coheed and Cambria were a lot of like the millennials' introduction to like prog music, and they approach it in vastly different ways. Like I definitely am like, Coheed's more Rush, while Mars Volta's more Frank Zappa. I don't.
Yeah, maybe.
More in common with the Dillinger Escape Plan than even Coheed and Cambria. Like, I don't know. Do you want to vote?
Yeah, sure. I forgot that we even talked about the first. Good.
Wire or the Mars Volta?
It's Wire.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's Wire.
I will always think of, when I think of the Mars Volta, I will think of riding in my wife's car when we were like dating early on, and for some reason she was like, I had gotten the Mars Volta's like first 3 records or something from somebody's iTunes, when you would just like bring a flash drive and copy stuff off of people's
yeah.
iTunes, and she copied it to her iPod because she was like, oh, I've heard of that band. I knew someone who was really into them. Which she wasn't listening to that much music, much like hardcore, post-hardcore stuff at that point anyway. So it was like weird that she even copied it to begin with. And I remember riding in her car one time. I think we were probably going home for like a holiday, or she was like maybe taking me and dropping me off, or in Hickory, or I don't remember what the deal was, but we were listening to probably this record or maybe the second record that she put it on her iPod. And I think I remember just being like, we don't have to listen to this. It was like, I don't know if you put this on for me, but if you want to listen to something else, you can.
Yeah, from what I know about your wife, it seems very odd that she would even be listening to the Mars Volta. Maybe she's like, maybe he'll like this. I don't know. I got it from his music.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I like the Mars Volta's early stuff, but Pink Flag is definitely the better record.
Yeah. Which one I'm going to come back to.
Yeah. All right, so our number 3 head-to-head, it is the number 4 seed Television and their album Marquee Moon up against the number 13 seed REM and their debut Murmur. We talked a little bit about Television. Marquee Moon is a classic, and I guess is like the punk record that is like, that points directly to the Velvet Underground as like an influence on punk music. Interestingly, Bandsplain just covered Television last week or the week before, which they only have 3 albums, yet they still managed to make like a 4-hour episode. But in it, the hosts, or she brought up the fact that she's like, this is not a punk record in the sense that like, or at least Marquee Moon, the song, is not a punk song because it's like long as shit. It's got like 3 solos in it. It's definitely more in common with like psychedelic rock, and it's yeah, her whole thesis was like, this is not punk. And it's kind of the same way I feel about the Velvet Underground, being like, their music is not punk music, but their approach and how they did things is punk. And that's how I feel about that Television record too. It's very much like, yeah, I mean, it's not necessarily like punk sounding, but
yeah, I think musically it's just art rock.
Yeah.
Like it's, kind of unconventional song structure and experimentation, and it's, it's all mid-tempo, and it's, the guitar playing is like way more complex than anything else that was getting labeled punk at this time. But there is something that is just, it's so sparse. It really is just the band playing in a room together in a way that is not what any art rock bands were doing prior to them. There's definitely like that influence of like early Psych, Doors, Velvet Underground, but there's a little bit of Modern Lovers, there's a little bit of the Stooges, there's even like like a T-Rex, glam rock influence, but yeah, it's all very subdued and out there. But yeah, I don't know, it's just it's a record that could only be recorded in single takes, though, which I feel like is something that's very punk. Like it has that sparse charm of just being like, we play the songs from beginning to end. There's literally no overdubs because I can't remember what I played. We can't double track the guitars because I don't have time to sit here and figure out what I just played by ear, because there are like actual improvisations like on the record. Like there's the set song structure, and then there's just like, well, I'm just gonna play the guitar here, and there's just like the absolute like cheapness of it, and the stiffness and dryness of the recording of it that is extremely punk. And then it's not impossible to like, if you just take Television and give it a funk rhythm and speed it up, it's Minutemen.
Yeah. So there's a record on this chart that this bracket that I think is a little bit more influential on the Minutemen sound, but yeah. I mean, it's a great record. It's one of those albums that like I'd heard a long time ago, but then like I put it on a couple years ago just to kind of be like, I want to listen to this again, see what the deal with this album is, and then I'm like, I was like taken aback by how good it was. Like my memory of the record wasn't as strong as my experience the second time, or like, revisiting it as much older and having listened to a much wider variety of music. And so I was just like, this rules. And like, yeah, the title track Marquee Moon is 10 minutes long, but it's good. It's such a good song. And I'm an impatient music listener, but I really like that song. It's fun and unique. And yeah, I don't know. It's like not even like my preferred like styles of music really, but they just do it so well that I just really like this album a lot.
I think going back to what genre it is too, I think it's a record that's deserving of being considered one of the first post-punk records, because I think that it is a post-proto-punk record. Like it's taking all of the influences that went into punk and then just immediately skipping that first wave of punk. And it's in the first wave of punk at the same time.
Yeah, it definitely has a post-punk feel to it, despite being punk, part of the punk wave.
It's getting from A to C without going through B, and doing it before anybody else got to C. Because it came out in February and Pink Flag came out in December. So
yeah. Do you think Wire was listening to Marquee Moon?
I'm sure they were.
Yeah.
And I mean, Talking Heads put out 77 in September.
Yeah.
So your post-punk forefathers, the first two are American. New York bands, CBGB bands.
REM's Murmur. This is one that I revisited this week specifically because I was like, I've listened to this record before, but I couldn't like tell you which one it was. You know what I mean? Like, I've listened to a bunch of their early stuff, and I get a lot of them kind of mixed up and confused. I guess because there's a lot of similarity in the first couple records by them. And so I was like, okay, which one is this? And I listened to it, and I was like, oh, this is the one where they're the most jangle pop. This is them like the most Smiths-y. You know, everybody called them the American Smiths back then, and one much better than the Smiths. But like the way the songs are written on this record and performed, it's like doesn't even feel like how REM records sound in the future. Like there's just this like oh, this is like they do come from punk music, and even though like they kind of are just like, yep, they're college rock and alternative rock forefathers, but it's like no, I mean the way they play was very much inspired by punk subgenres, which jangle pop was a subgenre of new wave, I guess, or it's like a post-punk subgenre too. I think of the Smiths as like a punk adjacent band, but I guess thinking of REM, they're like a punk adjacent band, like adjacent from the adjacency. This is the record with Radio Free Europe too, in case you're wondering what the single from this album is.
Yeah.
And yeah, I really enjoyed my listen through this time though. It really like connected with me, where previous listenings to this album didn't necessarily hit the same way, where I like the later albums definitely did more for me. How familiar are you with this one?
Murmur is probably the REM record I know best. I'm very all over the place with my REM album listens. It's one of the few that I've like made a conscious effort to like I've put it on and I listened to it like it was like it's not something that I passively absorbed. It's something that I like intentionally listened to. And I think it's really good. I think it's interesting. It's an interesting record to hear because it's got some really good stuff. I think Moral Kiosk is great. I think Radio Free Europe's great. And it's like a classic song. It's interesting to hear because it's not what you know REM as, but like obviously his voice is there. There are like tonalities that are there from the beginning, but it's like the songwriting, like the style is not right. It's not REM. It's not what I think of. It sounds like the Feelies or jangle pop stuff. Like, but it's also kind of nice because it's like, all right, this is kind of like the Smiths if they were good. So I have that option to listen to.
Well, you want to vote?
Sure.
What do you think? Television or REM? Marquee Moon or Murmur?
It's pretty easily Marquee Moon for me. That's a 5-star record. That's a 1001 album for me.
Yeah. I had a feeling that this bracket was going to be more unanimous. I don't know why I couldn't say unanimous for a second there.
Umami-ness.
It's got some umami. The first round at least was one that I was like, we're going to agree on a lot of these. Maybe the second round stuff once we see some of our head-to-heads then. But yeah, this is the television record. This is not the REM record. It's kind of how I think of it as. It's a really good REM record, but not wholly representative of their sound going forward, and not my favorite collection of their tunes, but it is really good. It might be like one of the stronger batches of like deep cuts, maybe. That's how I would think of it. But yeah, I want to vote for Marquee Moon as well. So our number 4 head-to-head, it is the number 5 seed Pixies and their debut Surfer Rosa against the number 12 seed Fugazi and their debut LP Repeater. So Repeater versus Surfer Rosa. This might be, looking at the head-to-heads, there's only one other one where I'm like, we might be split. Maybe. We'll see. This is the one where I'm like, this is actually probably some of the records I like the best going up against each other. I definitely like both of these albums more than any of the ones we've talked about so far. But we've talked a lot about the Pixies before in the past, but we'll quickly go through Surfer Rosa. Our hot take is the best Pixies record, which is it a hot take? A lot of people say Doolittle.
It should not be a hot take.
But I also don't think it's as hot as we think it is. I think it's still, people are like, and that one next, or I think it's pretty much a group. There's maybe go ahead.
I don't think it's hard to find other people who think that Surfer Rosa is better than Doolittle. It's probably not that hard to find people that agree with us, but it's still definitely not the majority opinion.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's an either or. Like, it's not like it's people aren't saying Doolittle's great and Surfer Rosa sucks. Like when people say that Doolittle is the better record, but
yeah, no one's saying that.
Doolittle is the more popular. It's the one that caught on, and it probably has the most listens, and it had that cultural impact that Surfer Rosa doesn't quite have. But
if we look at just Rate Your Music alone, 30,000 ratings for Surfer Rosa, 43,000 ratings for Doolittle. So it's still like, yeah, people have heard Surfer Rosa. Whereas you get to Bossa Nova and that's only 15,000 ratings. So if you've heard the Pixies, chances are you've heard this one and Doolittle.
I mean, yeah, Surfer Rosa has Gigantic and Where Is My Mind? Like, it has big songs on it.
Yeah. Some of their biggest songs, period.
Yeah.
But also it has like the first 3 tracks for Bone Machine and Break My Body. Perfect way to start this record. Bone Machine is one of my absolute favorite Pixie songs ever. Like, I put this album on the first time I ever heard it. I heard it blind. I bought it blind. I bought it because, like, I was like, I'm gonna buy this Pixie CD and listen to it. I know I'm gonna like it because I knew Where's My Mind, and I knew Gigantic and Here Comes My Man, or whatever that one's called. And so I was like, okay, let's put this album on. Bone Machine is the first song. The rest of the songs, but it starts with this. I love it. It's perfect. It's amazing. And then Break My Body's right after that. Just like an awesome run of songs on here. I genuinely hate Tony's theme though. I think it's so bad. Mainly for just the intro to it where they're talking. This is a song about Tony, who's a superhero. I hate that so much. I don't know why that bugs me, because the actual song itself, like, I'm fine with, like, especially like Frank's just like yelling Tony in that weird way he yells Tony, Tony, and I just, that intro makes me cringe so hard, like my spirit leaves my body. Just like,
the basic riff is really good.
Yeah, it is.
I mean, it's a surf rock send up, so it's not like thrilling. It's not like it was meant to be a great song.
It makes me think of Combat Chuck by Five Iron Frenzy, which is like the worst Five Iron song.
It's not enough to, make me turn it off or even skip the song.
I do. I skip Tony's theme, but I'm fine. Yeah. It's still a 5-star record for me. 1001 album to hear before you die. Like, it's definitely like their best album to me still. So
I think it's just like, I can totally gloss over that song because, like, by this point in the record, I'm like high off of Bone Machine, Break My Body, Broken Face, Gigantic, River Euphrates, even. I Where's My Mind?
Yeah.
Cactus, literally right before Tony's theme. It's just so easy to gloss over, like that one song. Repeater. So yeah. Fugazi's Repeater is the first LP. It's to call this feels like the Mars Volta thing, where it's like Mars Volta by the time they debuted are such a known quantity. Like Fugazi with Repeater being their first album, like, yeah, technically it's the debut, but like they've literally have an album's worth of material prior to this. It's just split into 2 EPs. Yeah, they already had the self-titled Margin Walker and 3 songs. Is 3 songs even like predate Repeater? Not before Repeater, I don't think, but
3 songs comes out in January of 1990. Same year. So yeah, even 3 songs is out before Repeater. And then 13 songs came out 89. So like 13 songs is really a lot of people's like, that's the first Fugazi record. It's like, well, actually it's the first compilation. Yeah. But it works so well. I mean, the self-titled EP is like on an LP, right? It's a 12-inch. It's like a 23-minute.
They both are. I mean, I have the self-titled and Margin Walker as 2 separate LPs.
Yeah, so like they already have like an album's worth of material by then, but I guess like you have to think of it from they wrote the record as an album,
Yeah.
and that's why Repeater gets on here. I feel because a lot of bands had EPs before their first record, and you're right, like they're already like well established musicians at this point. There had already been the entire Minor Threat career, the entire Embrace and Rites of Springs career, and the other bands that the other guys were in. What were they in before?
uh,
What was Joe in before?
Joe was in. Did they even release anything that he was?
I don't know. I don't see anything pre Fugazi by him.
Brendan was in Rites of Spring and
And One Last Wish.
One Last Wish. So
essentially, besides Joe, they already had pretty like well-established records released under their name. Discord had been a label for years at this point, so it was definitely just like Fugazi's a supergroup, which is very funny to think of. But Repeater is the man. I don't know where does Repeater go for you in Fugazi? I think it's the hardest hitting Fugazi record. It's the most hardcore album still, I think.
I don't know. In on the Kill Taker's really hard.
Yeah, but they'd already done Steady Diet of Nothing, which is like, I don't know. There are some less hardcore songs on In on the Kill Taker. Repeater feels like a mostly hardcore record from front to back.
Repeater is the one full length that does feel like a direct continuation of the first two EPs, the first three EPs even. Because everything else they would push in different directions, like with each record. Like Steady Diet is like the artier, weirder one, and In on the Kill Taker is like, it's pretty like hard and abrasive, and yeah, then they just get artier and artier.
Yeah.
With each album. But Repeater is that like very balanced record in their discography. But of their LPs, it's actually not one that I reach for that often.
It's not. Yeah, I definitely go to In on the Kill Taker or Steady Diet Nothing more often than I go to Repeater. Despite me thinking that Repeater is probably more satisfying listen than Steady Diet.
Well, and look at this. I mean, you look at this track listing on Repeater. It's like Turnover, Repeater, Merchandise, Sit-Fisted Fine, Two Beats Off, Styrofoam. Like, these songs are like incredibly standout songs in their discography. Like, from, like almost every song on the record. It's the Fugazi record shy of 13 songs you have most passively absorbed, maybe, because it's like one of the most popular ones. It's like the one that everyone agrees on, so you hear it a lot. It's the punk venue house music album in their discography.
Well, do you think you're able to vote on this one?
I can. Yeah, I can vote.
Surfer Rosa or Repeater?
I'm gonna say I'm gonna go with Surfer Rosa because I think of these two, it's the one I come back to more often.
Yeah. I'm voting on Surfer Rosa too. Just because like I just listen to the Pixies more than I listen to Fugazi in general. Fugazi is incredible, legendary band, but I feel like there's a little more work that I personally have to put into listening to Fugazi's music. Like I feel like I have to be more of an active listener when I'm listening to Fugazi versus Pixies to like fully like really get what's happening on a Fugazi record. I have to be paying closer attention. So whereas like there's like a pop sensibility to the Pixies that I think just like you can get a ton out of by active listening, but you also still get plenty of enjoyment out of passive listening too. So yeah, I'm voting for Surfer Rosa.
I mean, and I love Fugazi. Like I definitely like Fugazi way more than the Pixies as a band overall. But
Fugazi has a better complete discography. Yeah, 100%.
That Pixies record, man. Surfer Rosa is just that good.
All right, our number 5 head-to-head. It is the number 2 seed Joy Division and Unknown Pleasures up against the number 15 seed Ramones and their self-titled debut album. We just did a bracket not too long ago where we talked about Joy Division quite a bit. And we definitely were like, this band's not as good as everybody says they are. So I feel like we're going to be repeating ourselves a little bit here. But yes, the self-titled, there's only 2 actual Joy Division records. I don't know which is better. I can't tell you which is better. Maybe this one. I don't know.
I don't know. I don't love Joy Division. It's not a band I ever feel like putting on and listening to. And I've heard both of those records, but of my memory, I'm inclined to say Unknown Pleasures is better, but it's kind of like, I think both records are like just as unenjoyable to listen to for me that I'm just gonna I'm gonna give it to the one that is like influential. It's where the cultural cachet lends a record a little more credibility for me.
I'm trying to think of like a good comparison, these two records. It's like trying to choose between different. This is gonna be a really weird comparison. It only works for me. It's trying to like be like, do you like Barks or do you like Mug root beer better? And I'm like, well, I don't really want root beer most of the time. It's like my least gone to soda. So I don't know which one I really prefer. Maybe Barks.
I think I like the Barks can more.
Yeah. You're just going off of logos and cans, like the silver can. It looks kind of like a beer. It looks like a Seagram's. But I also never
Mug
drink
looks like
root
a soda for children.
I was gonna do cream sodas, but I couldn't remember another cream soda besides IBC.
What are the cream sodas?
Barks and Mug. The root beer companies just make cream sodas too. You want a Jones soda? I don't normally.
It's not one of those like flavors like butter, is it?
No, just like, do you want the blue or the green Jones soda? It's like candy apple or blue raspberry, or I don't know. That's how I feel about.
You want Stewart's?
I was like, I do like ginger ale, and I will listen. I will drink a ginger ale more than I will ever drink a root beer. Man, I can't think of very many situations where I would even want a root beer over any other soda.
Once in a couple of years, you're like, I haven't had a root beer in a long time.
Yeah. Should I get an A&W?
Yeah. Now let's talk about the Ramones.
Yeah.
Instead of root beers.
I'd rather talk about the root beers than Joy Division, but Ramones more than root beer. Yes, the first Ramones record features such hit songs as Blitzkrieg Bop, Beat on the Brat, Judy is a Punk, Havana Affair, 53rd and 3rd, and so many other great songs. I Want to Be Your Boyfriend, Chainsaw, Now I Want to Sniff Some Glue,
Today You're Loved, Tomorrow the World,
I Don't Want to Go Down to the Basement.
You said this was the number 16 seed.
The 15
seed. How the fuck is the Ramones self-titled record the 15th most popular
debut
punk album? You guys don't have to try so hard. Just listen to the Ramones. They're good.
Because of the way I had to do this, skipping like the second and third albums by bands, I think there were some other Ramones records higher up than this one.
Yeah.
But it was just like, I was like, what? But maybe not. It is the most rated. So this probably would have been the first one then, because I went by popularity. This is the band that actually really, really makes punk, kind of lays the framework of what punk is. And even then, it's like a very specific style of punk, but like the UK punk scene definitely was like modeled off the Ramones version of punk. And hardcore, I'd say hardcore is even like, especially like first wave American hardcore, is just like, we took the Ramones and we just tried to play it even faster than them and just harder, because they just do scales too. Like the original hardcore records are all scales. The Ramones are all scales. Like it's very much just like the Ramones are the reason why UK punk exists and why American hardcore exists. So yeah, the true. That's why we always say on here, the first punk band is the Ramones, 1976 self-titled record. Everyone else before that's proto, and a lot that came out the same year are proto too. But
yeah, I feel like it's only like a know-it-all that wants to argue against the Ramones being the first punk record. Like people want to be, it's like the Death thing, but it's like, well, like if Death is the first punk band, like that falls apart immediately if you look at the scene that they came from because the MC5 existed before them.
Yeah.
Like, you can't tell me Death is the first punk band and then watch a clip of the MC5 play Kick Out the Jams.
Yeah.
Like, that's a punk band. It's so easy to just like to be like, as a scene, as a genre, as a movement, punk started in 1976 with the Ramones. Like, it's just, you don't have to be like, you can go as far back into history as you want. The first distorted guitar set, recording.
Yeah.
Whatever. Like, Link Ray poking holes in his amp speakers, creating the power chord. The Ramones is a band that, like, it encapsulates so much of what came before of early rock and roll, R&B, surf rock. I mean, even the Velvet Underground. Like, you can make the connection from the Velvet Underground to the Ramones. You can tell that the Ramones were listening to the Velvet Underground. They were listening to, like, the pop songs, but they were also, like, in line with that mentality of, like, yeah, we can be sloppy and it's still good. Like, we can work within limitations and make something that is better than what was put in. It's just the most, like, boomer, like, punk grandpa in me that just cannot comprehend people that write off the Ramones. I don't get it. How have you listened to any punk band that came after them and you can't find something to appreciate about the Ramones?
I don't think we need to really debate it much more. Ramones are unknown pleasures.
Yeah, it's Ramones.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. Duh. Ramones. They move on. All right. Our number 6 head-to-head. It is the number 7 seed Talking Heads with Talking Heads 77 up against the number 10 seed Sex Pistols and Nevermind the Bollocks. So Talking Heads 77, most punk era of the Talking Heads, probably. Because, like, they're already, by the second album, like, incorporating funk into their music,
Yeah, listening to Afrobeat records.
Yeah. But yeah, the debut album, Talking Heads, the American post-punk band, really. Them and Television, despite being predating post-punk. Well, let's see. Talking Heads 77 came out in September 77.
Yeah.
So, did we say when Pink Flag came out?
Pink Flag is in December.
So it's like pretty close. That CBGB's, I almost don't really like, the CBGB scene was so, like, scattered in sound anyway that it was like them calling them, like, post-punk is weird too to me, because it's like it's this weird, like, what is punk in CBGBs versus what is punk in the UK by this time period. There's more of a uniform sound in England, but
that's because in England it was a lot of imitators. It was a lot of people trying to copy somebody else.
Yeah.
And, like, the CBGB scene was a lot of people trying to differentiate themselves.
Yeah. A lot of art school kids. Talking Heads were art school kids. Like, that, maybe that is, I was going to say a lot of art school kids. I don't think there were that many actual art school kids. A lot of them were, like, more of, like, street poets. Like, we've read a lot of Rimbaud and Gainsbourg.
It's beatnik, post hippie, yeah.
But they're like New Yorkers in a rough part of town. The Bowery, right? Is that where CBGB's was? Or was it Brooklyn?
I think most of New York was very rough.
Yeah. But yeah, this is the legendary record. Psycho Killer comes from here. This record probably has the most, like, uniform sound across the album. Uh-Oh, Love Comes to Town, No Compassion, The Book I Read, Pulled Up, Don't Worry About the Government. It's just, like, a really fun record that kind of, they have the Talking Heads had a rhythm, and not just from the bass and drums, but, like, even the way that David played guitar had this almost, like, locomotive kind of, like, chug-a-lug to his, like, guitar playing at this point. And it's just a really fun record, really enjoyable album. And then we have the Sex Pistols, who are, if we say the Ramones are the most important punk band, I guess you have to say that the Sex Pistols are probably the second most important punk band. at least as far as like getting punk going. Because yeah, the Ramones were like Sex Pistols, were just trying to do the Ramones. Ramones played in England. Everybody apparently was at that show in England, and then they all started bands. And then the same goes for like the first Sex Pistols show. It's like everyone else was at that show, and they all started bands. So
yeah. I mean, the Sex Pistols like defined it as a movement and
popularized it.
Yeah, they contributed. They gave it its most the most media attention is entirely because of the Sex Pistols. So like it became a UK music fad that made it possible for bands like The Clash to go be huge, and probably helped a lot of like new wave and post punk and all of the different changes that happened in UK rock music. I think the Sex Pistols opened a lot of those doors for a lot of those bands opportunities. So we've talked lots of shit about the Sex Pistols over the years, but I revisited this record last year, and I may have talked about it on And I'm Listening, but I'll reiterate here my realization is that if you take out basically all of the if you take out God Save the Queen and Anarchy in the UK and maybe one or two other kind of duds, you have still a really good punk record.
I think it's weird that you don't like their like two most famous songs.
It's overexposure, but I do think they are like some of their weakest songs. Like a song like God Save the Queen is like Johnny Rotten like parodying himself almost like on the first record, like because that stuff, some of those songs wound up being so much like written later after they'd been playing shows, and he just like developed this like character, this stage presence. He just like leaned into that on those songs where he's not doing the like he doesn't sound like he's sticking his tongue out the whole time he's singing like on every other song, because he hadn't decided on that style yet. He just kind of did that later. Those songs kind of got tacked on, and then they're like the ones that are like, oh, these are the big standout songs from the record because they're the most slogany, and I think they're the least interesting lyrically. I think they're the least interesting. They have the one little hook to them, and that's about it.
Well, let's vote. Never mind the Bollocks or Talking Heads 77.
I'm going with Talking Heads.
Yeah, I think I am too. I just get a lot more enjoyment out of it. And Johnny Rotten is so unpleasant and like a tool bag now. So you said he's like had become a parody. He was become a parody of himself. It's like a thing that he would do over and over and over again throughout his career. Just parody himself over and over again. Steve Jones seems lovely though.
Yeah.
All right, our number 7 head-to-head is the number 3 seed Weezer and their debut album, the Blue Album, we'll call it, and the number 14 seed Patti Smith and her debut album, Horses. Like everything we've talked about is like 70s, with the exception of like the Mars Volta, REM, Fugazi. Like there's not, I'd say less than half of this is like after the 80s, really. But Weezer's Blue Album, I mean, not really a punk record, but I guess you could say that it's inspired by pop punk. It's a predecessor to a lot of emo in the 90s as well. A lot of emo bands heard Blue Album and were like, I want to do that, and mixed it with like actual emo. But it's ultimately it's an alternative rock power pop record, slacker rock to a degree, and I think it's their best record. Hands down, easily their best record. I think you do too, but even then you don't even like it that much, right?
I like about half of it.
I mean, I think it's a good record from front to back. I don't think there's really anything in there that I'm like really down on. Are you just over the big songs? Overexposure?
No, I actually like the bigger songs more. Like those are among the best songs on the record. I think My Name Is Jonas is good. I think Buddy Holly's a good song despite its overplay. Say It Ain't So is a good song too.
Mm-hmm.
I think Undone is kind of a bad song, the Sweater song. It's almost 5 minutes long, and it's If You Want to Destroy My Sweater over and over again.
Don't forget the talking. There's a lot of talking in that song.
My Name is Jonas is a great song. Surf Wax America is my favorite song on that record.
You would say that.
Everything else about it's forgettable to me.
I mean, yeah. I mean, it's whatever. The worst songs on here being what, In the Garage and Holiday, maybe. I mean, I don't think those are even particularly bad. So, like, I still think they're solid songs. I mean, yeah, it's not like all-time favorite record, but it's definitely the best Weezer album, hands down. Everybody loves to say Pinkerton, but I find that record very difficult to listen to. And also, really, Blue Album's higher rated than Pinkerton on Radio Music. So I think that says something. But yeah, Blue Album, fun record. I enjoy it. Rick Ocasek, how do we say his name?
Ocasek.
I've always said it wrong. Ocasek produced it. Great choice. Get the Cars guy in there to produce your power pop record. Brilliant idea. I'm sure the label was the reason why they did it, but
wonder what that's like to produce someone who's just copying you.
Now the Cars are better than Weezer. That Bandsplain episode I talked about with Television, they were apparently very bummed when they heard the Cars because they were like, no, they beat us to it, was their thinking.
Television thought they sounded like the Cars?
I think it's before the record, and I think they started to change their sound because the Cars was so big. So I think there's a world that the early version of Television sounded more like the Cars than, I guess, also if you're putting in the landscape of the rest of like the music scene at that time. But yeah, when I heard that, I was like, what? You don't sound like the Cars at all. I like the Cars quite a bit. But
Marquee Moon came out before the first Cars record, though.
Did they have a single before?
No. All Mixed Up was 78. You're All That I've Got tonight. Maybe it's where Television was trying to go, because I could see that if you listen to the next Television record.
I don't know exactly where that timeline fell. It could be apocryphal for all we know.
Yeah.
But let's talk about Patti Smith's Horses. Have I gone on record by saying that's like an all-time great album, like one of the greatest records ever made?
I don't know, maybe. I know it was in my 100 and 100.
Yeah. We probably mentioned it because we covered the second Patti Smith group record a long time ago. Gosh, probably in the first 30 episodes or so. So I probably mentioned it there, where I was like, Horses is amazing. Horses is amazing. It's one that it's so funny. There are so many poorly made punk documentaries, but when you're a teenager and you're like, I want to know more about punk, you just kind of watch all of them. And I got one of them from the library and was watching it, and it had had two performances. It had Patti Smith performing Gloria, and maybe Birdland was the other one, or Free Money, maybe one of the two. There were two songs that they put on there, but Gloria was the one that really stuck out to me. And I went and bought the CD just based off of that one performance of Gloria, and then loved the record. Like, there were things that I had to grow into enjoying on the album, like some of the weirder, more like beat
Birdland.
poet. Yeah, beat poet moments of the record, but eventually, like, I got there. But I love this record. Gloria, Redondo Beach, Free Money, even Land, which is, as the Horses part, as well as the Land of a Thousand Dances. It's an interesting record because there's like two nearly 10-minute songs on here. Free Money Birdland's probably the worst of the two, but Land is fun, and they knew to, I guess they threw in Land of a Thousand Dances to like make it funny. Maybe it was a joke putting it in there. I don't know exactly. But Gloria itself, the song Gloria, incredible song.
Van Morrison. She made Van Morrison good. It's so funny how many people have been like incredibly influenced by Van Morrison, and how almost all of them are better than Van Morrison. Like, so much better than Van Morrison. It's should we vote?
Sure. I'm voting on Horses.
Yeah, I'm going with Horses as well.
I think we've voted the same on every single one of these so far.
Yeah.
Okay, our final first round head to head. It is the number 6 seed My Bloody Valentine and their album, I always have to look it up, Isn't Anything, with the number 11 seed Gang of Four and their album Entertainment. Start us off with some My Bloody Valentine.
Yeah, I guess we're counting this as a punk record.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know why. What reason is it? Is it
because of the insistence on Rate Your Music to subtag every secondary influence that is itself explained by the primary genres? If it's noise pop and shoegaze as primary genres, which is also redundant, because shoegaze is just a continuation of noise pop, and noise pop isn't a genre, but whatever. But then your subgenres are post-punk, dream pop, noise rock, C86, slacker rock. Like, well, all right, post-punk is an influence on shoegaze. So is dream pop. So is noise rock. So yeah, I would assume that the shoegaze band draws on those three genres. C86 and slacker rock, I don't know why those are there. I don't know why this website is obsessed with calling everything C86 if it didn't come out on a C86 comp.
It's not a C86 band.
And they're getting a little too liberal with the slacker rock tags too. A lot of people are like trying to die on the hill that everything is slacker rock.
Slacker rock is like 8 bands. Like, and it refers to like the post college rock. It's just Dinosaur Jr. It's what you mean when you say call it slacker rock, really. It's what you're trying. Sebado, Dinosaur Jr. That's what you're talking about when you say slacker rock. Whatever. Yeah, and My Bloody Valentine is not slacker rock, like, in any way whatsoever. What?
Yeah. The things that the overlap are just things that are explained by it being shoegaze. Isn't Anything is a good record that a certain kind of shoegaze listener likes to say is better than Loveless. That is not better than Loveless. It's fine. It's a good record. I can see how, if you're like really into shoegaze, you want to hear a record that's not Loveless sometimes. This is a perfect entry into that.
I guess it's shoegaze before it became so gauzy and just like washed, like the filter of everything. The shoegaze isn't on this record. This record actually feels like there's like more. I'd say those post-punk elements are probably a little more pronounced on this album than on Loveless. The songwriting is maybe a little less psychedelic, a little more structured. It's good. I like it a lot. And I may even like theoretically like this type of band better, like this slightly more post-punky version of shoegaze better. But Loveless as an album is definitely better than the two. Now, I'll say Isn't Anything's probably better than MBV, the 2013 album. I also just never want to listen to My Bloody Valentine, though.
Yeah.
Just overdone. Gang of Four's Entertainment are... So, when we say, who are the most important post-punk bands? I guess it depends on how much you consider Joy Division post-punk. I guess they are, really. At this point, goth isn't really a thing yet. And Joy Division is hugely important. Wire essentially invented it in the UK. But I think Gang of Four might be the more fun version of post-punk, especially in the early wave. Definitely more poppy or upbeat. A little faster, especially faster than what Wire was doing on the next two records, because this came out in 79. So we were comparing it to the other post-punk records, and they're all a little slower than this one.
Yeah, Gang of Four, Entertainment is probably more of a continuation of Pink Flag than Chairs Missing is. I think it's more consistently rooted in that like driving, that really like punchy guitar style, like punchy rattly guitar style. It also has more of it has a playfulness and maybe almost like a Devo silliness to it too. It's just it's very like tongue in cheek and like really self-aware and like trying to satirize pop music. But I think it also like successfully makes really good pop music, but it's just like entirely its own. I don't know. Gang of Four is a really influential band that I think the most like the bands that are the most directly influenced by them pale so much in comparison. I don't know. It's a sound that you're better off trying to avoid sounding like you're imitating, because it's just so it's so hard to do. It's such a like finely threaded like balance of like snotty punk and disco, and you're better off trying to sound like The Fall. That's a little easier to pull off.
This is the record I was talking about earlier when I mentioned the Minutemen, really borrowing from especially the song Damaged Goods. Like that guitar riff intro to Damaged Goods, it's like, oh, D Boon like just like, I'm gonna do this for like my first 3 albums, like that like that sound, just straight up just like, I'm gonna do that. You want to vote?
Sure.
Entertainment or Isn't Anything?
Entertainment.
Agreed. We unanimously voted on everything on the first round and did not have to tie break. So let's see where this goes. So our round 2, our first head-to-head, it is the Stooges' self-titled record up against Wire's Pink Flag.
Ooh.
This is actually a little tougher. Just because I'm like, I don't know. I don't reach for either one of these like first for most anything.
Yeah, these are 2 records that I have listened to recently too. Like just kind of like, but maybe it's worth pointing out, I listened to Pink Flag both as part of my calendar system and also in reference to the Wire record that we talked about. But the Stooges debut I reached for out of the blue. It was very much like, oh hey, I want to listen to that record right now. It's really hard to say which one I would go to more often.
I'm gonna vote for Pink Flag. I think there's just a little bit more there that I like.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with Pink Flag. I think as a record, it's more consistently enjoyable.
And if this were maybe Funhouse versus Pink Flag, I'd probably go Funhouse. But yeah. All right, our next head-to-head is Television's Marquee Moon up against the Pixies' Surfer Rosa. This, I think about it, and I'm like, this should be hard. But it's not actually that hard for me. As amazing and great as Marquee Moon is, I don't know. So I like Surfer Rosa more. I listen to Surfer Rosa more. I get more enjoyment out of it. I think it's more fun. And, yeah, I'm voting Surfer Rosa.
Well, this is our first split. I'm going with Marquee Moon.
Whoa.
I think that if you wanted to subdue me, you could put on Marquee Moon. Like you could just put that record on and I will. It's like the calming music for cats.
All right, well, let's do the tiebreaker then. So Marquee Moon, according to Rate Your Music, has 32,854 ratings and has a 4.14 average. That is so high.
That is very high. That is surprisingly high.
And the Pixies' Surfer Rosa has 30,055 ratings and has an average of 3.91. So Television goes on. All right, our next head-to-head is Ramones self-titled versus Talking Heads 77. As much as I love the Talking Heads, it's very easy for me to vote for the Ramones.
Yeah.
It's like my number 3 or 4 Talking Heads record.
Yeah.
It also is like my number, like...
It's probably my 3rd favorite Ramones
album,
3rd or 4th favorite Ramones album, but it's more consistent.
Yeah. The Ramones moving on. And the final of round 2, Patti Smith Horses up against Gang, and my notes say Gang of Gang. It's Gang of Fours.
Gang,
Entertainment. Gang. I was thinking more like King of Kings. You truly are the King of Kings. Wow. Okay. So Horses, I think, is the better piece of art, but Entertainment is the more fun record. So then it's really a matter of like what matters more to you. I'm gonna go with Horses.
I think I'm gonna go with Gang of Four.
Gang gang. Let's head to head this then and find out if Patty Smith, horses out of 16,614 ratings has a 3.90 average, and Gang of Four out of 17,973 ratings has a 3.95. That was very close.
Yeah.
Gang of Four moves on. This time I wrote Gong of Four, so that's
One
fun.
man. One man gang of four.
Okay, now it is Wire's Pink Flag up against Television's Marquee Moon. I think I'm gonna go with Television on this one.
Yeah. Pretty easily. Marky Moon that's a 5-star record for me. It's gonna be hard for anybody to beat.
Yeah. And then that leads us to Ramones self-titled up against Gang of Four's Entertainment. I'm voting for the Ramones.
That's the Gang of Four record I would reach for. That's not necessarily the Ramones record I would reach for. I think I'm going with Gang of Four on this one too.
So Gang of Four's 3.95 going up against the Ramones. Out of 16,582 votes, it has an average of 3.71. So Gang of Four moves on. And so our final head-to-head is Television's Marquee Moon up against Gang of Four's Entertainment. I'm voting for Gang of Four on this one.
Out of spite?
No, I just genuinely like it better. I mean, Television's great, but I just have more fun with Entertainment than Marquee Moon. But we know how it's going to go. So
yeah, I mean, there's no point in voting. Marquee Moon is the winner.
Yes.
It has a 4.14, which is going to beat the tiebreak.
So not necessarily what I expected to win. I definitely thought it was a Final Four album, but yeah, because of the process of elimination there. Very fun. Yeah, Television's Marquee Moon is the winner. The most music guy we could have gone.
Yeah.
Album we could have selected.
Yeah, I know.
Well, this was fun. I think we could do debuts in the future. Maybe we'll wait a year before we tap into it again. But there's so many more bands that had records that I would like to put head to head. So I did skip over. What did I skip over? There were a couple things that I skipped because we had just done them, like on an earlier bracket. Like there were 2 albums that we've already done, and I was like, oh, we've talked about these specific albums, so we'll skip them. I can't remember which ones they were now off the top of my head, but stuff we've talked about recently. But yes, thank you everyone for listening, and hopefully you enjoyed this dive into some of the most obvious records of all time. And we will talk to you later.